Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to do a deep dive into a move that has really shaken up the mental health treatment world.
Yeah, it's pretty big.
It is. Johnson & Johnson, you know them as J&J,
Oh, yeah.
they acquired Intra-Cellular Therapies, or ITI.
Right.
And this isn't just any ordinary pharma deal.
It's, well, what's interesting here is that, well, J&J has a pretty massive market cap.
Huge. $342 billion.
Yeah. And they just bought ITI, which is worth $10 billion.
Right.
But here's the thing. J&J's own market cap, it's actually down 12% over the last year.
So they're not exactly on a spending spree, you would think.
Exactly. It makes you think, why? What is J&J seeing in ITI?
That's the big question, right? What's their game plan?
Well, you have to look at the big picture. You know, J&J, they're facing some hurdles. Stelara, their big psoriasis treatment, it's about to lose exclusivity.
Oh, wow.
Which means, you know, a potential hit to their revenue.
Yeah, that's got to hurt.
So they need to find a new source of growth, and it looks like they're betting on neuroscience.
Makes sense. I mean, with all the focus on mental health these days.
Absolutely. Increasing awareness, need for better treatments. It's a field ripe for innovation.
And that's where ITI comes in, right?
Bingo. They have this incredible drug, Caplyta. It's making waves in the mental health community.
I've heard of it. It's an atypical antipsychotic, right? But like, what makes it different from all the others out there?
Well, it's not like those older drugs in that class. It works in a totally different way. Most antipsychotics, they focus on just one neurotransmitter in the brain, dopamine usually. But Caplyta, it acts on three: dopamine, serotonin, and glutamate.
Whoa, 3. That's a lot.
Right. Think of it like a three-legged stool. You know, if one leg's too short, too long, the whole thing's wobbly. That's kind of what's happening in the brain with certain mental illnesses. Caplyta, it aims to adjust all three legs, you could say, to get things back in balance and improve symptoms.
I love that analogy. So it's not just blocking dopamine like the older drugs. It's like fine-tuning multiple systems in the brain.
Exactly. It's a potent 5-HT2A receptor antagonist.
Okay, now you're just using big words.
Well, in simple terms, it blocked a specific type of serotonin receptor, one that's often overactive in schizophrenia and stuff.
Got it.
And at the same time, it works on those dopamine receptors, but in a different way than the older drugs. Plus, it inhibits the reuptake of serotonin, boosting those levels in the brain. So, yeah, it's doing a lot.
Okay, so this multi-pronged approach, this is what gives Caplyta an edge, like better effectiveness, fewer side effects.
You got it. And the clinical trials, they back that up.
It's impressive.
Really is. Caplyta's shown great results treating both schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. Big reductions in relapse rates, improvement in depressive symptoms.
That's amazing. But no drug is perfect.
Of course, of course. Every medication has risks. Caplyta is no different. It has a couple of box warnings. Those are the most serious kind the FDA can issue.
I see.
One of them is for elderly patients with dementia-related psychosis. There's an increased risk of death for these patients when taking antipsychotics, and Caplyta is not approved for that specific use.
So that's something doctors and patients need to be aware of when making decisions about treatment, for sure.
Definitely.
But let's zoom out for a minute. J&J is buying ITI, who developed this potentially game-changing drug.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the money involved. What does the financial side of this look like?
Okay, so J&J, they paid a cool $14.6 billion
Wow.
in cash
Wow.
to get all the outstanding shares of ITI.
Wow.
$132 per share.
Okay, that's a big chunk of change.
It is. And that's a pretty hefty premium over ITI's market value, which was $10 billion. But that $10 billion, that was partly because their share price jumped 40% in the year leading up to the acquisition.
Wow, so they were already on the rise.
Exactly. J&J was clearly willing to pay top dollar to get ITI and all that potential.
And ITI wasn't exactly struggling. I mean, they just had that settlement with Sandoz, right?
You're right.
Which extended Caplyta's market exclusivity. So they were in a pretty strong position already. What else, besides Caplyta, made them so attractive to a giant like J&J?
That's where things get even more interesting. ITI, they have a whole pipeline of promising therapies in development.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Targeting all sorts of conditions. Remember those PDE1 inhibitors I mentioned?
Refresh my memory.
One's called lenrispodun, and it's being looked at for Parkinson's.
Oh, right.
And there's another one, ITI 1020, that's being studied for its potential in cancer immunotherapy.
Wow, so not just mental health stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Different fields, but the science behind it, it's cutting edge. J&J sees the potential for broader applications.
So it's not just about getting one blockbuster drug. It's about tapping into a company that's a real innovator. and has this pipeline that could lead to all sorts of breakthroughs.
You got it.
So what else is in that pipeline?
Well, one thing that really drew people to ITI was their origin story.
Oh,
It all goes back to Dr. Paul Greengard,
the Nobel Prize winner.
the one and only. He revolutionized how we understand how therapies work at a cellular level.
I had no idea. ITI had such a prestigious background. Tell me more about their beginnings.
Well, ITI, they were founded in 2002. Their mission was to create innovative treatments for these complex neuropsychiatric and neurological disorders.
This has been around for a while.
Yeah. And early on, they snagged an exclusive license from Bristol Myers Squibb. This was back in 2005.
Okay.
It was for a bunch of compounds targeting the central nervous system.
Interesting.
And then in 2012, they raised a whopping $60 million.
60 million.
In a private placement. So, investors were already seeing their potential back then.
Wow, they've been steadily building momentum. Nobel Prize origins, key partnerships, big investments.
It's quite a story.
And then Caplyta comes along and it's like, boom, potential game changer.
It sure is. Caplyta's already raked in over $462 million in net product sales just in 2023.
Wow, that's a huge increase.
86% increase from the year before. And get this, prescription demand, it jumped 85% year over year. Some analysts are even saying Caplyta could hit over $3 billion in sales by 2030.
Those are blockbuster numbers. No wonder J&J wanted in. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We've laid the groundwork, talked about the key players, and looked at the money side of things. Now let's really dive into what this acquisition could mean for the future of mental health treatment.
All right, let's do it.
What are the potential impacts, the challenges, the opportunities?
Let's get into it. This acquisition, it could really change things. It could really reshape how we treat mental health.
Yeah, how so?
Well, you see, J&J, they have the resources, the expertise.
Right.
They could really speed things up. The development of ITI's pipeline, bringing new therapies to market faster.
That's huge. I mean, so many people are dealing with conditions like generalized anxiety disorder,
Absolutely.
Alzheimer's disease-related psychosis.
Yeah, there's a real need for better treatments, for sure.
Absolutely.
And it's not just about speed. J&J, they could bring, more innovative approaches, those PDE1 inhibitors, for example.
Yeah, those were interesting.
They've shown promise in Parkinson's disease.
Right, and even cancer immunotherapy.
Exactly. It's fascinating, isn't it?
It is. It's like those underlying mechanisms, they can be targeted for different conditions.
Right, like seemingly unrelated conditions.
Like a ripple effect, Discoveries in one area lead to breakthroughs in others.
Precisely. It makes you wonder what else is possible.
Absolutely.
With the right resources, the right collaboration.
Absolutely.
And then there's the issue of access.
Yeah, and affordability.
The cost of mental health care, it's a big barrier.
It is for so many people. I mean, even when effective treatments exist.
Exactly.
They're out of reach.
Out of reach for the people who need them most.
Exactly.
Now, look, I'm not a fortune teller, but J&J, with their influence,
Right.
they could, potentially lead to more affordable options.
That would be amazing.
Right. Making these therapies accessible to a wider population.
That would be a game changer, honestly.
It's something to watch, for sure.
It would be amazing if a company like J&J, with their global reach, their resources, they could help make mental health treatment more equitable, more accessible.
It would be incredible.
But then there's the flip side.
Right.
This consolidation of power in the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah.
Could that lead to even higher prices?
That's a valid concern for sure. It's, it's a complex issue.
Definitely.
No easy answers. We have to remember, pharmaceutical companies, they're businesses.
Right.
Their goal is to, make money for their shareholders.
Right, of course.
But they also have a responsibility, right, to patients, to society.
Absolutely.
A delicate balance, and I'm really curious to see how J&J handles that.
Me too, me too. This acquisition raises a lot of questions.
Definitely.
Important ethical questions, economic questions. But let's get back to the science for a bit. We've talked about Caplyta, the PDE1 inhibitors.
Yeah.
But there's more to ITI's pipeline, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. They have ITI 333.
What's that?
It's a whole new compound. They're researching it for opioid use disorder.
Wow.
Pain and mood disorders, too.
So this is addressing the opioid crisis head on.
It could be huge.
Yeah, we desperately need safe and effective treatments for addiction.
Absolutely. And it's still early days.
Okay.
But the early data, it's looking good.
What's the mechanism there? How does it work?
It targets this receptor in the brain, the kappa opioid receptor.
Right.
And this receptor, it's involved in, pain perception, mood regulation, and importantly, the rewarding effects of opioids.
So blocking this receptor could reduce cravings, help with withdrawal symptoms.
Exactly. And it could help prevent relapse.
So it's not just about treating the addiction itself, but also the underlying pain that often leads people to opioids in the first place.
That's a really good point. It's a more holistic approach.
It is, yeah.
And, it's not just opioid addiction. ITI 333 is also being looked at for chronic pain and mood disorders.
Which often go hand in hand with addiction.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's an exciting compound. Lots of potential.
Absolutely. And what about the ITI 1500 series? You mentioned ITI 1549.
Oh yeah, that one's being explored for mood disorders.
Right. What's going on there?
It's an NMDA receptor modulator.
NMDA.
Yeah, it's the NMDA receptor, it's a key player in all sorts of brain functions.
Okay.
Learning, memory, synaptic plasticity.
Synaptic what?
Plasticity. It's basically the brain's ability to change and adapt.
Oh, okay.
And, if this receptor isn't working properly, it's been linked to mood disorders.
Like depression and bipolar.
Exactly.
So modulating this receptor, that could be a new way to treat these conditions.
That's the idea. And it could be especially helpful for people who haven't responded well to other treatments.
This pipeline is sounding more and more impressive.
It's pretty amazing, right?
And now, with J&J involved, it feels like all these possibilities.
Yeah.
They're closer than ever to becoming a reality.
That's the exciting part. J&J, they're known for getting drugs to market.
Right.
And their global reach, it could make these therapies available worldwide.
But, and this is a big but,
Yeah.
great power comes with great responsibility.
That's true.
How do we make sure these treatments, these potentially life-changing treatments,
Yeah.
how do we make sure they're used ethically, responsibly, and that they're accessible to everyone who needs them?
That's the million-dollar question. It's something we all need to think about.
Yeah.
Developing new treatments, it's only part of the solution. We need to tackle the bigger issues, too.
Like what?
Healthcare disparities,
Right.
affordability, stigma.
All the things that prevent people from getting the help they need.
Exactly.
It's a complex problem, but we can't ignore it.
We can't. The stakes are too high.
Absolutely. We've covered a lot today.
We have.
This acquisition, the potential impact of ITI's pipeline. But before we wrap up, let's zoom out again. Big picture. What are the long-term implications of this deal?
That's a great question. This acquisition, it brings up some really important questions about the future of mental health care.
Like what?
Well, how will J&J shape the research, the development of new therapies?
Right. What will they prioritize?
Will it be those blockbuster drugs like Caplyta, or will they invest in those more specialized treatments?
For less common conditions.
Exactly. And what about competition? Will this deal lead to lower prices, more access?
Or will we see, like, a few big companies controlling everything?
These are tough questions.
Definitely.
No easy answers, but we have to think about them as we look to the future.
Absolutely.
This acquisition, it's just the start of a new chapter in mental health treatment. It'll be fascinating to see how it all plays out.
It's pretty amazing, right? When you think about how far we've come in understanding and treating mental health.
It really is.
I mean, for those early discoveries,
Yeah.
With Dr. Greengard's Nobel Prize-winning research, to a drug like Caplyta that targets multiple brain systems.
Yeah.
It feels like we're, at a turning point.
I think so, too. It's a real shift. We're not just managing symptoms anymore.
Right.
We're starting to understand those underlying mechanisms in the brain.
That contribute to these disorders.
Exactly. It's a much more targeted approach.
And hopefully more effective.
Briefly, much more.
It's like finally some light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
Not just for people struggling with mental health conditions, but for their families, too.
You're absolutely right. It's so important to remember that. The impact of mental illness, it goes way beyond the individual.
It really does. It affects families, communities.
Our whole society.
Exactly. And that's why this acquisition is so important. It has the potential for new treatments, more effective treatments.
It's not just about, profits and market share. It's
Right.
about improving people's lives.
Millions of people.
Worldwide.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from all of this?
I'd say, remember, this is just the start. We still have so much to learn about the brain.
Oh, yeah. It's incredibly complex.
It really is. But with every discovery, with every new therapy, we get a little bit closer.
Closer to what?
Closer to a future where Mental health conditions, they're not something to be ashamed of, where people can get the help they need.
Without the stigma.
Right, where they're treated with the same, urgency and effectiveness as any other health concern.
And that future, it depends on everyone, right?
Absolutely. It's going to take continued research, investment, and a change in how we think about mental illness.
It's about creating a more compassionate and supportive world.
Exactly. Where people feel safe asking for help, and where mental health is just as important as physical health.
I love that. We've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
Nobel Prizes, blockbuster drugs, the ethics of it all.
Big economics.
But we've just scratched the surface, really.
Yeah. There's always more to learn.
So much more to explore. So to our listeners, we leave you with this. Think about how this acquisition and these new treatments like Caplyta, how might they change things for people dealing with mental health conditions?
How will it affect their families?
It's a question worth thinking about.
It's a conversation we need to keep having.
And it's a future we can all help shape.
Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Until next time.